All right, guys, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So once again, if you're this is the one pager for Unit 3. You will be having a Unit 3 mastery quiz tomorrow. I just want to go over some of the details, some of the things I think you guys have forgotten in order to be able to polish your skills on this topics. The first one is going to be the Great Compromise. So these two compromises are going to take place during the Constitutional Convention, which is the rulebook meeting when their delegates are going to meet. Now, what these two things have in common, what you guys need to remember is this. They both have to do with more something in Congress. And think about it, the more something in Congress equals more power. So it's going to have to do with representation. So once again, the Great Compromise is going to adopt both the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan, which you'll see a video right now that's going to explain that to you. So when you're watching the video on Brain Pop, which I'm going to put right now, make sure to pay attention to this because it's super important to refresh your memory. And also the 3/5 Compromise is going to talk about slavery. Now, once again, it's what these both have in common have to do with more representation in Congress, because more representation equals more power to pass laws in our legislative branch. Moving on, remember your AOC. Remember some of the weaknesses from the Articles of Confederation. It gave all the power to the Confederates, which is the state power over the federal government. Some of the weaknesses, as you guys know, no national army, no national taxes. What else? No national leader. No legislative branch. Well, actually, no executive branch or judicial branch. And it was a very, very weak government. And in order to change it, everybody had to agree to change it, which is super, super impossible to fix this. It was so bad that Shays' Rebellion is going to emerge because this guy's it was a former soldier. He's gonna go against our government. And this is when George Washington says, you know what, maybe we need to change our government, which is why they're going to make the Constitution. Now, as you guys know, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists want a strong federal government. Anti-Federalists want a weak federal government because they want state power. They like the Articles of Confederation. The Federalists love the Constitution. And then the amendment process is the process to change the Constitution. And this is kind of like the formula to change our Constitution. We've only had 27 changes in the past 200 some years, so it's very, very difficult to change it. But we have changed it throughout the course of history. And then you got your Bill of Rights, which is your individual rights, your first 10 amendments. Everybody's pretty good on this. And then your 7 principles. So these are the 7 principles of the Constitution. Please look over this. Individual rights is your Bill of Rights. Republicanism, it's representative government, which we elect people to represent us. We would all love to be president one day, but unfortunately we can't. So we have to elect someone to be our president to represent us. And that's when we go vote and we do our election. And that's kind of what republicanism is. Popular sovereignty, we the people have the power. Limited government, you cannot do whatever you want. You have limits to what you can and cannot do. Separation of powers, every branch has their separate powers of what they can and cannot do. And then checks and balances, each branch can check each other out. President can veto a bill. The legislative branch can override the president's veto. Judicial branch can declare a law unconstitutional. So that's kind of what checks and balances are. And then we got federalism, when the state and the federal government share power. Now, I'm going too fast because I want to make sure I get all this stuff down before the 15 minutes are up, because I'm going to show you a video in a bit. And last but not least, we have our Marbury versus Madison. That's going to be Eminem equals Jolly Rancher, which equals judicial review. It declares if a law is constitutional or unconstitutional. Alright guys, so I'm going to go ahead and put the video real quick. I'll be pausing it and asking you guys questions throughout the video. So here we go.
Dear Tim and Moby, why do they call the Constitution a living document? Thanks, Selma. Great question, Selma. You've probably heard all about what an amazing document the U.S. Constitution is. How it's a blueprint for our federal government. How it unified 13 states into one nation. And how it's lasted more than 200 years through hard times and even a civil war. All that is true enough, but it can give you the wrong idea. Well, like that the Constitution is some sacred text. Or that the framers, the guys who wrote the thing, all agreed with each other. Or that we're meant to follow its rules exactly as they wrote them forever. This point of view ignores the real story of how the Constitution was born. It was May of 1787 in Philadelphia. Political leaders from around the nation were gathering to discuss changes to the Articles of Confederation. That was America's first constitution, written in 1776. The Articles had been created almost as an afterthought to the Declaration of Independence. To wage war on England, the newly independent states needed to coordinate with each other. But they didn't want to give away too much of their own power. So the Articles established a weak national Congress where each state got one vote. All it could really do was declare war and manage foreign affairs. Once the war had been won in 1783, things began falling apart. America had borrowed enormous sums of money to finance the war.
And remember, this Articles of Confederation was made more just to keep the United States happy. So whatever they want to hear, they would add it to the Articles of Confederation. Do you want to pay taxes? No, I do not want to pay taxes. And then they wrote that down. And then after the war is over and they win the war, they find out like, holy crap, all the things we asked for and we wanted, we did get, but it's not actually a good thing. Like, no national taxes is bad because you do not have money to pay off the debt like they're showing you here. You do not have national money to pay for your national army, your national leaders, your soldiers that fought in the war. So a lot of things are going to emerge because of this. So national taxes are actually a good thing if our government uses it wisely, and that's what they're going to find out after the war is over.
Now those bills were coming due. The Confederation Congress didn't have taxing power, so it couldn't raise money to pay the debts back. Individual states owed money too. All of that debt was dragging down the economy, and things were starting to get ugly. Rhode Island had basically declared that neither it nor its citizens would be paying their debts back. And in 1786, there was a tax revolt in Massachusetts. Shays' rebellion lasted for months, and there was nothing the Articles Congress could do about it. Eventually, a local militia managed to put it down.
So once again, because we do not have national tax, we do not have a national army. So every state back then had their own militia. It was kind of like their state military. And like it says here, it took months to put it down because nobody really had a strong state militia. So it took a while to gather them up. And what I mean by state militia is this, right? Let's pretend that I'm living back then and I'm part of the state militia. I'm living in my home, it's kind of like, unless they call me for help, then I go and help. But I'm not like training year round to be the state militia. I'm living my normal life, and then when a crisis emerges, then I get my gun and I go help my state, And that's kind of why it took forever to put this rebellion down, because it's a bunch of people living their lives, and then they ask them to come out of their houses and go put down a rebellion. So it was not good because nobody was getting paid for this. It was kind of like volunteer work. All right, moving on.
But it was a wake-up call for the country. If America couldn't pay off its debts, no one would do business with it. And if it couldn't keep the peace, how would it defend its own borders? Everyone going to the Philadelphia Convention saw the need for a stronger central government. But just how strong was a matter of fierce debate. 55 delegates from 12 states met over the course of that summer to decide. They elected George Washington to preside since he was the most trusted among them. Despite the heat, they kept the windows shut and the drapes drawn. Because if the public knew what they were planning, it might have triggered another rebellion. James Madison set the tone for the convention with a bold plan. Instead of just fixing the Articles of Confederation, he proposed scrapping it entirely. His Virginia plan called for a government composed of a legislative, executive, and judicial branch.
So remember, during the AOC, we only have one branch of government, which is basically the legislative branch, and it's only one house, and everybody gets one vote, and everybody has to agree to change it. So it wasn't a good thing. So this Virginia plan is 3 different branches, so we all share power. So that's what he proposed.
Yep, just like today, and his legislature even had 2 houses. The government would have authority over anything the states couldn't handle themselves. It could also veto any state laws it didn't like. So, a strong national government overseeing weaker states. Yep, pretty much the exact opposite of the Articles. Madison's plan scared some delegates, but just as many were frightened by the economic slump. They were wealthy men who tended to favor a powerful government. It would stabilize the economy, which would benefit their businesses. The Virginia Plan also called for proportional representation in both houses of Congress. States with more people got more representatives in each house.
So remember, Virginia Plan, it benefits large states with large population, and then equals more representation, and that's really strong because it's more power in Congress to pass laws they like.
That way, instead of states getting decision-making power over the country's direction, the people would. Nope, delegates from small states weren't too keen on that idea. They knew Madison's plan would give them less power than the Articles government. Led by William Patterson, they proposed the New Jersey Plan. It kept the Confederation Congress intact, but gave new powers like collecting taxes. Like the Virginia Plan, it called for an executive and judicial branch. Right, the legislature was the biggest difference between the two plans. Which should be represented, states or people? The delegates argued this point into July, keeping the windows closed through a brutal heat wave. Opponents of Madison's plan said it was illegal. The convention didn't have the authority to create a new government. It seemed that there was no middle ground, and the convention would be a failure. Finally, Roger Sherman put forward the Connecticut Compromise, or Great Compromise. It gave each state 2 representatives in the Senate, and proportional representation in the House of...
So basically, this is going to be the New Jersey Plan. Every state gets 2 representatives per state. And then this one, the more population, the more representation. So in order to pass a law, they both have to have 2/3 of both houses agree on it in order to become a law in America. So that's what this Great Compromise is about. So make sure you remember that for your exit ticket.
Of representatives. Yeah, it may seem obvious to you, but this was a new thing back then. Anyway, the question of representation raised another thorny issue: slavery. Southern states knew they'd be outnumbered in the House of Representatives, and a northern majority might push through legislation outlawing slavery. To boost their power in the House, Southern delegates proposed that slaves count toward the number of representatives they got. Northerners didn't think it was fair to count people who wouldn't even be allowed to vote.
This would be known as the 3/5 Compromise.
And secretly, abolitionists like Ben Franklin and Alexander Hamilton probably did want to outlaw the slave trade. Yeah, plenty of people back then were opposed to slavery. Even Madison, a slave owner, called it a barbarous practice. But if Southern delegates walked out of the convention, it would have spelled the end of the United States. Again, a last-minute settlement was reached, the 3/5 Compromise. For the purposes of representation, states could count 3/5 of their slaves. And Congress was barred from making any laws about slavery for 20 years. Well, that's my point. The framers were smart guys, but they were far from perfect. Most of them were just trying to protect the interests of the people they represented. The document they hammered together that summer wasn't perfect either. Everybody was equally dissatisfied with it. But the framers understood that no single document would settle their arguments. That wasn't the purpose of the U.S. Constitution. Its purpose was to keep those arguments going. If you think about it, that's all our government is, a 200-year-old debate about how to run the country. That's why the framers included a way to add amendments or changes to the Constitution. In fact, the nation added 10 amendments before every state had even adopted it. These are known as the Bill of Rights. Since then, we've added 17 more. Some of them actually reverse rules from the original document. So when we say the Constitution is alive, we mean that it changes with the times. And that's definitely a good thing. Don't.
So once again, that's known as the amendment process. As you guys know, that is the process to change the Constitution, and that's why it's so important, because we the people do have the power to change our Constitution and our rule book, because it's never going to be perfect, and it needs to adapt to our generation over time. Alright, make sure you watch this video and make sure you answer your exit ticket at the end of this video. Thank you guys.